right, so today we are in Love and Torah, part 43. A few people online who, this is their first time, go, part what? 43. And no, that's not the longest one we've ever done. It's not even the second longest one we've ever done. Okay, it's probably the third at this point, but okay. So Love and Torah, part 43. And we're still trying to understand, what's love got to do? See, we didn't sing that in a lot of parts. Okay, we want to understand what love has to do with it. Because after all, you know, this is those conversations that you have with a lot of your friends that are still in or dealing with Christian mindset and Christian thought, is that, well, it's about love now, not Torah. What does love and Torah have to do with each other? Well, they're not. There's a disconnect there. And for 43 parts, now this will be 43, we've been seeing that, no, they're actually inseparable. They're inextricably connected to each other. We understand that there are two great commands, to love our Creator and to love each other. And He gives us what's called Torah, or instruction on how to do it. So all of the verses about love are also in places where we have instructions on how to do it and what it looks like and what's expected. And so this is why we've been doing this teaching. Okay, so we've been looking the last bunch of parts at loving each other. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, also known as the love chapter. Okay? For a minute I thought I was going to tell you guys I'll be back in 2 and 2, but no. Okay, so some of you got that. All right. So 1 Corinthians 13, and it's called the love chapter because the whole topic of the chapter is to understand love. And in the first 3 verses, which is really pretty much what we covered last time, as well as some stuff in Romans, etc. But here we covered the first 3 verses. The first 3 verses said, look, it doesn't matter, I'm just going to paraphrase the first 3 verses. It doesn't matter what incredible, amazing, wow type things I can do. If I don't have love, it doesn't matter. Okay, that's just to paraphrase real simply. I can do all these things that you would just be like, wow, that's so amazing. But without love, who cares? Is basically, there's no value. So Paul wants to give you that perspective before he goes into the rest. And then in verse 4, he starts off and says, love is patient, is kind, love does not envy, love does not boast, is not puffed up. So we talked about that, I think, a little bit last time, the idea of being patient and kind. Now bear in mind that this is not, I want to make sure I say this the way I want to. It is kindness and patience under all circumstances, but it's not just patience and kindness when it's easy. It takes the love we're talking about here to do when you would normally not be kind or patient. Or you would generally tend to envy, but you don't, because it takes a different level of love to do these things. So I just want to make sure it's clear, because sometimes people say, well, I have love, I have the fruit of the Spirit. Love is the first aspect of the fruit of the Spirit. But, you know, Yeshua says, if you love those loving you, what value is there in that? If you love, but what about loving an enemy? And we've talked about that, right? So love is patient, is kind, and does not envy in all of the circumstances where those would not be the things you would want to have as your response. You would, well, intellectually you might want those to be your responses, but your default emotion, your habit would not be to react that way. And we want to find our way to where love is our response, which can take the form of patience and kindness, not envying. And what's envy? When you look at something and you desire it and you don't have it. Or you look at somebody else and they have something and you think that it's, you know, I wish I were them because they have that. And so part of this love is self-love. See, if your self-love is right, you're not going to envy anything. You'll be very content with what you have. You only envy because you feel you lack. You envy because you feel you lack. Okay? Love does not boast, is not puffed up. Okay, so love doesn't have to blow its own trumpet, doesn't have to blow its own, trumpet out its own stuff. Does not behave indecently, does not seek its own, is not provoked, reckons not the evil. So let's go through some of those items. Does not behave indecently. Now let's talk about indecently. There are going to be some things that come up in the scriptures that are not very specifically addressed in terms of detail, like indecently. Well, what does it mean to not behave indecently? I think different cultures, different time would think differently about that word. What's decent and what's not decent. What's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Okay? You could go to a part of the world, say near the equator, and find peoples that are living in villages that wear almost nothing, and there's no indecency there. You can go to other parts of the world with very different culture where they think that having a skirt over higher up than your ankle is indecent. Okay? They would want to have you covered from your chin to your toes. Very different cultural understandings. And so this, remember, has to do with love. This isn't just instruction on right and wrong. So it is not loving to behave in a manner that the people around you think is indecent. Did you follow that? So he's saying be respectful in loving relationship to understand what that person feels is indecent and try not to offend them that way. If you do something that they may think is indecent. It's a loving thing. Now, that's not to say that you have to change your whole life to please everybody. I'm not saying that. But have an awareness that where you are and who you're with has certain expectations. We talk a lot about in relationships, there's always expectations. Whether they're agreed to or not, they're there. You guys already have expectations of me, and I have ones of you, whether we talked about them or not. If you're married, you had expectations of your spouse, they had of you, whether you discussed them and agreed to them or not. Which is why I encourage people before they get married to actually have an expectations conversation so that they actually can choose to agree to the expectations of the other person and have them agree to yours. So remember, this is love. So when you're talking about love, generally we're talking about needing, it involves, not needing, but it involves another person. I did talk a little bit about self-love, because self-love also has to do with another person. It's like if you love yourself properly, you're not going to envy the other person. Because if you envy the other person, you're going to act and behave and treat them in a certain way. All right? So here he says that love does not behave indecently, does not seek its own. So you're going to be aware of what is appropriate situationally. Okay, remember we talked a lot over the last couple of weeks about this idea of awareness. I want to now package that into a very specific area called situational awareness. There's some things that are absolutely appropriate under certain circumstances and situations that would be completely inappropriate in another situation. But you have to have an awareness of what you're situated in. Be very helpful if more of us, I'll include myself, quietly say nothing and do nothing when they first walk into a room that has ongoing things to figure out what the situation is before you jump into it. Because some of you will go into a situation, hear just one little bit of the conversation, having no context to it, and jump right in with both feet in a totally wrong direction. So you want to have situational awareness. It also means that if you walk into a room, you need to be aware, is the person on another phone call? Is the person talking to somebody? Are they in the middle of something that needs their concentration? If you're dealing with something that's not an urgent or emergency type of situation, first be aware of your situation. That's loving to have a high level of situational awareness. Is that making sense to you? Because if you have that, you're not seeking your own. Because now, if you start barging into a room, yelling for attention, and you want, even though it's really not an emergency, no idea what else is going on in the room, that's seeking your own. That's part of what it means to seek your own. Part of it also is understanding that if you're in a relationship, there's you and the other person, or multiple other people, right? You could have a group that has a relationship as a group, or a whole family has a relationship. And if you're always seeking only your way, your thing, it has to be about you in some way, that doesn't work. That's not loving. Loving is to seek what's for the other. Seeking out what they need, what they want, what will make them happy. That doesn't mean that you subjugate your stuff and never have. Some of you have really struggled because you've never been allowed to want anything. It's always been forced on you that everything has to be about everybody else, and you don't even know what you want. We're looking for balance here. But those who's out of balance is only seeking its own way, its own desire, its own thought, its own approach. Everything is about, now this I call selfish. Don't confuse selfish in this way with selfish in terms of things that you normally think. The opposite is generosity. Because you wouldn't think what I'm talking about here. We're talking about selfish versus generosity. We're talking about selfish versus outward approach, outward loving, outward thinking, outward appreciation. Selfish meaning it's inward. It's about you. It's what you like and you don't like. Even when you're being nice to people, sometimes you do it the way you want, not the way they would want. Which is why I've always said, it's not helpful unless the other person thinks it's helpful. You may think, because I have a lot of husbands and wives, and they get in all kinds of troubles, and one of them will always say to the other one, well, I was just trying to help. If it's not what they wanted, it's not helpful. But they said they were planning to do something or thinking of buying something, and then you went out and bought the wrong one. Or they weren't ready to get it now. Or communicate better. Say, hey, I'm going to be at this store. Would you like me to look for that thing? Or I'm going to be doing this. Would you like me to do yours? Like maybe the person's cleaning up some area of the house that's theirs, and they say, hey, I'm going to be over this. Would you like me to do yours too? I mean, there's things but ask, all right? Because you may in your mind be very clear that you're being helpful, but you're not. But technically, doing something for the other person you would think is that way, but they're not going to receive it that way. So, you're not going to behave indecently, which I said is very arbitrary to the situation, all right? And so, you would know that the things that the other person might feel is inappropriate or indecent. And so you might want to look and do things differently. But my wife, when she was raised, they were not wearing pants. The ladies, the girls were not wearing pants. And so when she would go to her parents' house, she did not wear pants. She didn't have a problem personally wearing them, but she knew it was a problem for her parents. And so out of respect, considering an other above yourself, right, giving honor and respect that way, she would wear a skirt or a dress. Because that would be to not cause an issue for somebody else. And if it's not going to cause you an issue, to be able to bless somebody else, why not? So it's a little inconvenient for you. It's not really your preference, but you're able to give somebody where they are in their walk and their growth and their understanding a blessing, okay? And so this is what it's talking about there. So let's be careful with that indecently, because that indecent concept really is so not universally understood. It's so arbitrary, so subjective, that you can't just walk around saying, well, that person's being indecent. Well, in your opinion. I may agree, I may not agree, but it's still, you have to start off with, but that's your opinion about decency, okay? I've told the story. Thankfully, I wasn't there at the moment when it happened, although I wish I had been there to some degree to stop it from happening. But, we had a lady walk into our congregation, about 9 years ago, in another place, another building, and had her daughter with her. Her daughter was 15, 16, something like that. Is that about right? Teenager, okay? A little bit older, mid-teenager. And she was wearing a fairly, I would say, showing, like a dress that showed more than some people would think is decent. All right? Now, I didn't get to see any of this. I'm just hearing the story. But what I did hear was that when she walked in, there was a few of the ladies that freaked out and basically threw a blanket over her. Mortified the poor girl and her mother. They never wanted to come back again after that. And I can't blame them. Why would you treat somebody that way? Instead of taking them off to the side at some point quietly and say, this so you understand, here where we are, we encourage people to dress in a certain way so that it doesn't disturb some of the people that have concerns that this is or is not appropriate, because remember, everybody's come from different places. But could you imagine the reaction? Or even if they didn't throw the blanket over, they literally threw something over her, so she was covered. Or if they didn't do that, could you imagine the talking around the room? That would have been like, pointing fingers and like shock and talking about, this is not loving, okay? This is not the way we need to treat people. Was it decent or indecent? I didn't see. I don't have an opinion. The way it was handled was indecent. That's what I would tell you. There was no way, that was not a decent way to handle something like that. If somebody were to come in here, I would hope that we would at the right time, even if we had to wait till the end of service, because you guys could survive one service like that. Somebody appropriate in the leadership could go over and talk to, and in the case of this girl, talk to her mother, not her, and very respectfully share information so that they can avoid being in an embarrassing situation, because they wouldn't want to have that either. But just let's remember that when we have a problem, that we are filtering it through our own personal experience. Okay? Whoever it was knows who they are. I'm not trying to embarrass them. It doesn't matter. This happens on a regular basis. I have people that have an issue, and they'll say, I happened to walk by these people or those people, and I was concerned because they were using foul language. So I said, what's foul language? And the person said, well, they were using this, like an F-bomb or this bomb, whatever they are. I said, oh, no. What is foul language? Where is that in here? So he said, well, you know, when Paul talks about using coarse language isn't foul language. I can call you an idiot or stupid, which wouldn't be considered foul language by most people, but if I call you that, that's coarse. Or even the tone of voice when I say, what's wrong with you? There must be something wrong with you. That's very coarse. Okay? Some of you are laughing because you say those kind of things to your spouse on a regular basis. No. Or your children, or employees or coworkers. That's coarse language. Language that is directed at somebody and it's coarse. What does something that's coarse do? It rubs and it hurts. Like if you take a coarse piece of sandpaper, right? It's rough. Rough language. But if someone's just talking and they happen to use language you don't agree with or don't feel is appropriate, that doesn't mean it's bad words. There are no bad words. They don't exist. They're culturally appropriate. That's what the decency thing is. If I'm with people, regardless of what words I like to use or don't like, it's irrelevant. I am aware of what words people are comfortable with, and try to be anyway, and I try to honor that as best I can. Because there may be words that I didn't think was a bad word by any means, and that person may still have a problem with it. And I've run into that, like, really? You think that one's a bad word? I don't know. But there's no such thing, and there's no scripture about it. There's no scripture about how high up your dress should be and how low down it needs to be. Now, there's some verses for the men, making sure they're bound up properly and they're covered properly when they walk into the temple. So there's something for guys. Okay? There isn't any verses for this stuff. It's social, cultural, and it needs to be respected, that it's real. Okay? So I'm not arguing against any of it. Let's just understand that you're going to get all upset because somebody said something or did something that you have been raised to think was a big deal. And in your group and circle, it's a big deal. In other groups and circles, it may not be. Okay? You may have grown up in a home where you never heard a word that people would call a foul language or a bad word. You may never have heard them. And very rarely outside. Or you could have grown up in a big city where you heard it every sentence. It's just part of every sentence. And so let's be careful when we're talking about love. Love is in a relationship. Love is an interaction between two or more people in a way that is designed to honor and not shame, to show respect and not offend. And so this whole idea of decency and appropriateness is relational. All right? And so let's just keep that in mind, because we've been raised with these very arbitrary things. If you were raised somewhere else, you'd be thinking very different things. Okay? If you were raised in parts of the world where people wear less clothing, you would have no problem with them wearing less clothing. If you were raised in, say, an Orthodox community where they wear their clothing all the way down to their ankles, you would feel that would be the way that it needs to go, ankles to the chin. If you were raised anywhere in between, that's what you're comfortable with. But you have to recognize that it's not seeking its own. In other words, it's not about you. It's about you in a relationship with them understanding the other person and being willing to show respect for where they're coming from. Now, if you're not comfortable with what they want you to do, okay? We had a problem in the congregation back in Knoxville many years ago. Some of the ladies there came from very Mennonite sort of backgrounds, wanted to have everything down to the ankles. My wife, who wears very appropriate things, had some skirts at the time that went a little higher than that. Well below the knee, but a little higher than the ankle, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay? And she was cute. Still is. Okay? But she kept coming to me not really happy about the grief they were giving her because she didn't see anything wrong with what she was wearing. And then she felt the pressure, and actually it's in line with this verse, and I said to her the same thing. I said, why don't you just wear the longer stuff just to appease and ease their concerns so it's not a distraction while they're trying to grow up. Okay? And that was the difference of a few inches between the floor and like a few inches above the ankle. I mean, we're not talking like anything that was very showy. But yet it was an issue in that particular group with those ladies. And they would give anybody a hard time just like that. And so this is what we're talking about. So I want to make sure as we're reading this, because a lot of you have read this love chapter a million times, and you're not really maybe understanding all of the details of what this is talking about. So everything I just said is from the point of view of, you don't get to now go to other people and say, well, Rabbi said that there are no bad words. I'm just going to say whatever I want. No. I was just going to use a bad word to stop you. Okay? Don't do that. What I said was that out of love, you would have respect for if a person in their growth, in their maturity, look, don't take this wrong. If anything that comes out of my mouth bothers you on like an emotional level, you're not mature yet, okay? Most people aren't, so I'm not picking on anybody, all right? But if you have reached the level of maturity that you are eventually to get to, then nothing anybody says will bother you. You'll be like, well, that's where they are in their walk and their life, and they're comfortable with it, and who cares, okay? Go back to the developing the character Yeshua teaching where I said, look, a selfless person can't be offended, can't be bothered by this. I actually said something a long time ago. I'm going to do a little reset here. If whatever just happened, meaning you're in the middle of something and something happens, okay? If whatever just happened affects you emotionally, you get offended and irritated on that level, then you were not mature enough to handle the thing that just happened. Okay? Think about what I just said. If whatever just happened creates that huge negative emotional response, you just learned that in that area, you were not mature enough yet to handle that situation. Apparently that includes logging into things with passwords and stuff. I'm just not mature enough to do that. Okay? And so this is important while we're going through this. Don't use this now as some sort of weapon to say, well, I can do what I want because Rabbi said that it's a cultural... No, this is about you caring about what the other person feels. This is about you caring about how they feel. Now, if you don't agree with it, then work it out in a discussion with them. You share your expectation, they share theirs, and then you negotiate. I'm really not comfortable with this thing that you're doing. And the person says, but I really like it and I'm comfortable with it and there's nothing really wrong with it. Then you say, okay, let's kind of find a way to agree while right now we're disagreeing. How can we come to a place where we're both going to be able to agree? Whatever those things are. And by the way, it may be as simple as if there's enough of them, one person sort of gets to have it their way on this one and I get to have it my way on the other one and you get to have it, you could trade it off or find a middle ground. There's all kinds of things you can do. But I want to make sure you heard me really clearly that this is about you caring about them, okay? About what they think is indecent. All right. It says that it's not provoked. Love is not provoked. We all fail right there. All right? Because we're provoked by all of these things I just said and everything else. It's because we haven't reached the level of maturity yet. Okay, this is reaching the highest level of maturity of love is to be able to do all of these things. Full, mature love is patient, is kind, is not envy, does not boast or puffed up, and doesn't behave indecently, doesn't seek its own, isn't provoked. These are all things that are this is the goal of what love could be if you work in that direction, okay? That's what he's giving us is a target to aim at, all right? And so I don't want to go into that more because you already know all the things that provoke you. And some of us, it doesn't take much, okay? Okay, so that's, just accept that and as being your struggle. You need to work on that so you're not provoked. It says here, reckons not the evil. Reckons not the evil. What do you think that means? Reckons not the evil. It's an interesting phrase to sneak in there or stick right there. What is evil? What is evil? Anything that's going or being used or performing or acting in a way not designed by the Creator to be that way, right? Okay? When you don't act the way you were created to be, that's evil. When you do something that He never created to have it be. When you eat something that He never created to be food, that's evil. When you observe days He never instructed us to observe, that's evil. When I do obvious things like murder and adultery, those are evil because He didn't design us to murder each other or to commit adultery. Okay? And so it says here, reckons not the evil. When you talk about there's going to be a reckoning, you mean there's going to be a payback or a comeuppance or a reaping. Oh, I can't wait. Well, so reckons not the evil means that you are not looking at the evil around you and you're the one who's going to bring the reckoning. Or you're the one who's going to decide what should be done. If you love and you're acting in a loving manner and evil is happening, meaning the stuff that is not the way Yahweh designed it to be, you have to watch out that you don't jump into that judge seat and you're going to reckon the evil. And this is what it might look like. You see somebody doing something, you go, well, I'm so glad I'm not them, that evil person. They're doing that dumb stuff. They're just going right wherever. I mean, this is the kind of way we talk. Or that person is awful, or they're this, or they're that, or some other thing. We think all these terrible things about people instead of realizing you were them at some point. Maybe not doing that exact thing, but you're doing other stuff on the same level as far as He's concerned. Because there is no hierarchy of evil in His mind. Okay? Because you might think, well, stealing's not as bad as murder. They both bring death. So, let's be careful. And so just be careful that you don't come into, if in a love relationship, you're not reckoning the evil. In other words, you're not holding it against someone. You're not judging. Verse 6, does not rejoice over the unrighteousness. See how that's connected to the evil? The next thing he says is, look, you're not rejoicing over the unrighteousness. They got what they deserved. Because this is a relational thing, not just what you're doing. It's not like you're not rejoicing when you do unrighteous things. We're talking about the unrighteousness between people. And so let's remember that we're talking about love here, which is an interactive between two or more people. Does not rejoice over the unrighteous, but rejoices in the truth. Okay? So now we're also not acting in an unrighteous manner, but we're acting in a truthful, correct manner. When it says rejoices in the truth, we're not talking about when you're arguing about something and you've got the truth, the other one's got a lie. Well, you're lying. No, I'm telling the truth. It's not about just truth and lie. It's when we talked about truth in the verse, it talks about those who would worship in spirit and truth. Yahweh is seeking those that would worship Him in spirit and truth. What did we say truth was? The actual mechanical behavior. The obedience mechanically to the commandments. What was the spirit? The fullness of the intention behind the truth. The spirit of the law, so to speak, right? So we have that in Matthew, in Yeshua's first instructional midrash, when he says, you've heard of old not to commit adultery. Well, that's true. That's truth. And if you didn't sleep with her or him, whichever way, well, then you, in truth, didn't break the law. Oh, but if you wanted to, thought about it, lusted about it, dreamed about it, fantasized about it, whatever, well, he says you've broken it anyway. Because the intention was not just not to do the physical act, was not to want to do it. So here he says that those that are in a loving relationship rejoice in truth by functioning correctly, not rejoicing in unrighteousness by functioning incorrectly. So this could also be when you are responding to something that whoever the person you're interacting with, the person who's in the loving relationship. It could be your spouse, it could be a friend, it could be your children, that there's a relationship. And there can be an appropriate love relationship with friends. We call that the Philadelphia love, the filial love. Okay, that's a friendship love, brotherly love. But in those love relationships, you can get into a real problem with this unrighteousness versus truth thing. And I told you that if you are right in a discussion or a debate that starts to come up, but you handle it in a wrong way, now you're still wrong. But some of you are all excited and proud of the way you were being so wrong. Okay, here's a rejoicing in unrighteousness. All the mocking posts that you put on Facebook, mocking people that don't believe like you believe. And you're loving it and share it with all your friends because you think you're so clever and it's so funny. You're not supposed to rejoice in that. Because it's inappropriate. It's unrighteous. They're only where they are because Abba left them there at this point. So far, he's left them in that space. Just like you were until he popped your bubble. And now you're all puffed up and boasting and all the other stuff it says not to do. You got to be careful with this stuff. Be very careful. He says, it covers all, believes all, expects all, and endures all. Okay, so it covers all. Love covers all. So in other words, what is a cover? It goes over, it can go all the way around, whatever the thing is that you're covering. Okay? So love is a covering over all that you're dealing with. And if it's a covering, let's say it's a covering that's see-through, but it's filtering. So now if I have a love covering with my wife, with Billy, with my children, with any of you in the congregation, that means that when I look at them in the situations that we're in, I'm looking through a covering of love that's filtering how I'm going to see it, experience it, and respond to it. Love covers all, if it's appropriate. Now, of course, there's a lot of uncovered people who are acting in uncovered ways, and there isn't anything covering anything except unrighteous mindsets and unrighteous thoughts and unrighteous emotions and that kind of stuff. Believes all. This is a really dangerous word, the way it comes out in English. It's not believes all. Well, if you loved me, you'd believe me. No, that's not what it's talking about here. It believes all. What is a Hebrew word that could be put there? How about emunah? So love is covering all, and there's a belief also about everything that Abba's got it all under control and he's allowing or causing. So you will have a much better loving relationship if you embrace that he has it all under control, that he is allowing whatever craziness you're involved in and witnessing. Or he's causing it so that you can learn to respond correctly. That's belief. So love believes all is in his hands. Okay, so it's not about believing the other person necessarily, okay? Because the other person may not have a bit of truth in whatever they're saying. So you don't just sit there and have to believe them. But you're believing him as having authority in everything. Him as having it all under control. Him as causing or allowing everything. Does that make more sense? Expects all. Now again, love is not expecting all from the other person. I don't just expect all these things from my wife or she just expects from me. We have our expectations. But what it's talking about here is that we're expecting it in the context of him, in the context of what we just learned. I expect that you are walking out your own salvation in fear and trembling. If you are or not, I expect that that's your problem and your thing. And I also expect that you understand that I'm walking out mine. If we're married, you should expect certain things from me as a husband. I should expect certain things from you as a wife. Other things that are not specifically laid out in Scripture in those relationships are things that we can negotiate and come into agreement. Remember, one of the most important verses in Scripture is the two can't walk together unless they agree. You can't walk with somebody if you're not in agreement. You can't walk together. And we have a lot of husbands and wives out there, the vast majority, that never, ever came into an agreement before they got married, except that they wanted to get married. They didn't discuss most of what life was going to be like and agree on how that would look. And then they get angry and frustrated because you had the expectation, but you never agreed to what they were thinking, and their expectation didn't match yours. So you get things like one person says, well, if I had known, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so if I had known. Or what happens is, well, I never promised you that, because one person's mad at the other. Well, how come you never do this? And the person's like, I never said I would. And the person just looks at you, what do you mean you never said you would? Because in your mind, you expected it. You just thought you're your wife or you're the husband, and this is what you should do. And the person has never said that. When we were just newly married over a few years, I remember saying, at one point, she might have said something like, if I had only known it, I would have said, well, I never offered that. We've had that conversation because we didn't do the expectations before we got married. And so that's why it's such an important part of the premarital stuff. And some of you need to do it now anyway. Just sit down and discuss what it is you really are offering the other person and they should expect from you and what you would like to expect from them, and let them do the same thing, and then come into agreement on those things. And actually, in some ways, it's even an advantage to do it now if you've been married more than 5 or 10 years, because you know each other. Not only do you know each other, but you know what things should be in the discussion. When I'm talking to people who have never been married before and they're thinking about getting married, they don't even know what to discuss. They have a few things they can guess would be, on the list. Because I tell them, try to picture what life is going to be like on a regular daily basis once you're married. And that's asking somebody to do something that they can't really understand. They know what their parents kind of looked like doing it, or other people's parents doing the whole marriage thing, but they don't know what it's like. See, now you've been married for a little while, and you can actually sit down and make it clear to your spouse, maybe even renew your vows after you come to agreement. Much better vows this time than last time, because now you've got an agreement. Well, I really don't like it when you do this stuff. Okay. And then another person says, well, I don't like it when you do that stuff. Okay, so how about I work on mine and you work on yours and we'll walk in agreement here? Or I'd really like to do this and, well, I don't really care about doing that. Okay, so why don't you do a little of that with me, and then this other thing you want, I'll do a little of that with you, whatever it is. And then you come to agreement. Otherwise, you're frustrated and angry, and you get bitter because you think that the other person doesn't love you, right? That's what we're talking about here, because they're not meeting your expectations. Because you feel that those are the things that demonstrate love. If you loved me, you would do this. If you loved me, you would do that. If you loved me, you wouldn't do this thing. If you loved me, you wouldn't do that thing. And the other person's thinking, what does that have to do with love? I'm thinking a whole different perspective. Well, if you loved me, this wouldn't bother you, or this wouldn't be this, or this. And then the thing turns into a giant fight. And so if we're going to learn to love each other, all relationships, friends, parenting, husband, wife, even employer, employee, all have to be with an agreement. Actually, a lot of companies do this better than we do as regular, interacting relationships, because the companies give you an employee handbook. And the employee handbook tells you what you can expect from the company and what they expect from you. And then you get a position, and the person who trains you for the position and supervises you tells you, this is what I expect from you. This is what you can expect from me. So in the job place, they, not always, but at least more often than not, do a better job than we do in our other relationships, where we just sort of have them because they work or they don't work, but we don't actually talk about it. See, I had a problem in the past, because I always was the one who called everybody who I was friends with, and a lot of times I ended up being friends with responders. See, I think in life there's initiators and responders. You can break the whole world into 2 groups. Sometimes you can break them up into 4 groups. This is a good one with 2 groups. And I tended to have friends that were responders, which makes sense because I'm such an aggressive initiator. It's good to have a responder. Problem was, I had an expectation that if we were friends, you would call me. Not always, I would call you too, but that you would call me. But my responder friends just loved it that I called them, and they didn't feel the need to call me because they were responders. They would respond to the fact that I called. But I got upset enough to get in front of one of my friends' faces, and I said, why don't you ever call me? I thought you were my friend, blah, blah. And you know what that friend did? Never talked to me again. They didn't want to be attacked as a responder. They didn't have the expectation that somehow the way we were going was not expressing love and friendship properly. And that was a pretty good friend of mine, and that was the end of that friendship because I got angry about an expectation that we hadn't agreed to. Okay? And so I now accept in my relationships with the people that I'm friends with, who might call and who does the calling and how that all works. I've had a conversation when I first started discovering this with my wife. She's much more of a responder, so are most of her friends, and she'll be asking me like, I think so-and-so's mad at me. I go, why? Well, they haven't called me in a while. I said, have you called them? No. I bet you they think you're mad at them. I said, 2 responders all mad at each other because neither one's willing to pick up the phone. It sounds dumb, but it happens all the time. But it's because the expectation's not there. So what happens when the expectations aren't met? You're forced to jump to a conclusion about the reason for the expectation not being met. Well, they haven't called me. Well, in my mind, it'd only happen if they don't like me and they're mad at me for something. Oh, could it be something else? Nope, I've already figured it out. I'm blue and I figured it out. But you haven't, and you need to talk about these things. Okay, so let's be careful. So love expects all. Expects all in the context of 2 walking together in agreement. Okay? Let's put that expects all. There's an expectancy that all that is agreed to will come about. So you're going with a positive anticipation of expectation. Now you're not going to be provoked, previous verse, if the expectation isn't met. But you're going to expect optimistically. Not expect like sitting there, hands on hips going, come on, I expect this to be done. No, you're going to be hopefully optimistic. Hey, this is going to happen. And if it's not, I'm not going to get provoked. We'll have another discussion about expectations that aren't being met to find out why. Not to attack the person. Say, I remember we talked about this expectation, and I noticed that you're not doing that, or you're doing something we agreed that you wouldn't do, and I want to just talk about that so we can fix it before it turns into a fight. Okay? So this is important. Endures all. That one doesn't even need an explanation, I don't think. Every relationship is an endurance marathon. Okay? And marathon is, I think, normally about 26 miles. And all of you in relationships feel like you're on mile 25. You know what I'm saying? And you're just worn out and tired and can't even yet see the finish line. Maybe mile 20. 25 is too close to the finish line. And you're thinking, I don't think I could even get there. I'm shot. I'm tired. This is hard. I've already gone 20 miles. I got to go another 6. I don't think I can go another 6. I'm not sure I can go another 1. You need endurance. Okay, you need endurance. Nobody said this was going to be easy. Yeshua said his yoke was easy. Yoke is a discipleship term for coming under instruction. He never said life would be easy. He said that your life would be challenged. You would suffer as he suffered. You'd have to bear your own stake. He never said it was going to be easy. You have challenges. And in those challenges, we have to have the trust and emunah of the Father. We have to have all this love to cover the whole thing. Aren't you happy that Abba does love perfectly? So he covers all, expects all, forgives all, endures all, isn't provoked, doesn't reckon the evil. Praise Yah, he does that with us. We'd all be in big trouble. Okay? Love never fails. Love doesn't fail. You can fail at it because you're not doing it fully and right, but love itself doesn't fail. Love never fails. You can stop applying love. You can stop walking in love. You can stop being love, because Elohim is love. And if Elohim is love and we're trying to become him, we're going to try to become love, which means we're going to try to become patient and kind and not envying and not puffed up, not boasting, all that stuff. Love never fails. You may fail, but when you're failing, if you look at it, isn't it because you had a problem doing one of the aspects of love? So it's not that love failed, you just weren't doing it. Maybe you were provoked. Maybe you were envying. Maybe you were not being patient or kind. Maybe whatever. Maybe the other person wasn't being patient or kind, and so you were provoked. Maybe you were doing the provoking. Whatever it is, it's not love. But love, when it's being done, love never fails. Elohim never fails. So this really has to do with our understanding of love. And so he says, look, love never fails. He says, whether there are prophecies, they shall be inactive, or tongues, they shall cease, or knowledge, it shall be inactive. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But, he says, but when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part shall be inactive. So he's trying to help us understand that we are always doing things partially. Okay? Partially. He says, but that which is perfect, when that has come, then that which is in part shall be inactive. So when we talk about things like prophecy, because he's talking about that last, right before that, what is prophecy? Speaking the word of Elohim with authority in a limited sense. In other words, the prophet's speaking about some very specific, small number of things. Right? Prophets are not talking about everything, necessarily. When you read the books of the prophets, they're speaking about a few very specific things. And they're giving you some detail, but not a whole lot necessarily. But yet, when they happen and play out, we go, oh, we don't need the prophecy anymore. We now see exactly what he was talking about. Okay? Because now that it's happened, it's happened. Okay? When Abram was told that his descendants would be strangers in a land not their own and slaves, etc., for a long time, nobody understood what that meant exactly. Then we look at the time in Egypt and in the Exodus from, and we go, oh. So now we don't need that as prophecy anymore. It's now inactive. Now it's evidence of something that was prophetically said and then came true. Because remember, prophecy is about things that haven't happened yet, or to get you to do things now that you need to do now. Once it's happened, it's a historical record. Okay, it's not a prophecy anymore. It's a record about a prophecy that happened. So he's saying here, so I don't want people to misunderstand this, because it says, for we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when that is perfect has come, that which was in part shall be inactive. Some people use this to get rid of the Torah. Very foolish. Well, it says Yeshua is the goal of the Torah. Yes. The goal of the Torah is to make you him. Not the goal of the Torah was until he showed up and now we don't need it anymore. The fact that he could do it perfectly hasn't helped me or you at all in our walking it out. It helps us in that because he's perfect, he gets to sit at the right hand, and all the things about eternal life can come true. Had he failed, it wouldn't. But his walking it out perfectly has no effect and no help to you when you're walking it out, except to be an example of what it looks like. So the goal of the Torah, if it was just pointing to Yeshua, then we don't need it anymore, that makes less than 0 sense. Because the Torah was for you, not for him. He's the living, walking Torah just to show you what it looks like. He was the one who gave us the Torah, because he knew we needed it to know, understand how to be like him. And so let's understand that when we look at this, because he says, well, that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part shall be inactive. So in other words, when you have the full understanding, then the partial understanding is no longer active. Now you understand. You get it. I tell people all the time, think of that with your marriages. You don't know each other till you're married. And even then, it takes a few years to really know each other. Because it takes time with each other to really see how the other person handles and reacts to everything. And so you have an incomplete or partial understanding about the other person that eventually becomes perfect. Not that they become perfect, but your understanding of them goes more and more towards perfect. Now that's going to be hard to do if you're constantly filtering it through the selfish, about me, I don't like, I don't want, I like, I want filters, instead of accepting that I now know them exactly as they are without filters. I don't judge them. This is love now. I accept that that's who they are. It's easy to do on some levels with someone who's openly and obviously handicapped. If the person's handicapped, let's say, is a physical one, so it's easy to see, maybe their legs don't work and they're in a wheelchair. Maybe they're missing an arm. Maybe some other thing. You know what I'm saying? It's an obvious handicap, and you say, I can accept you as you are. But what about when it's emotional, functional, dysfunctional, cultural, whatever it is, where they learned behaviors that are not as you would desire them to be? Can you accept that's still who they are? See, you fight because you're angry because they're not what you want them to be, and you ready for this? In the immense arrogance, because you would never do what they're doing, you think that they're wrong and horrible and you want to get angry with them instead of just accepting, wait a minute, this is who they are. Not who they have to stay necessarily. They can grow and hopefully become mature, but you have to accept this is who you married. This is who you're friends with. Some people have left here because they got to know me and they didn't like me. Me, not the teaching this, they didn't like me. Instead of accepting that I'm the one, me, as I am, that was put here. Some people didn't like Moses. He was the one who was the way he was. Some people didn't like Paul. There's not a single person in leadership anywhere that everybody liked. King David's talking about all the time, everybody wants to kill him. We think of David as being a hero and a likable guy and everything. Even Yeshua they wanted to kill. And so it's got to start off with love accepts that you are what you are and who you are, and that you are, I would believe, in the expectation. When it says expect, well, optimistically expect that you're wanting to grow into something more. But I'm okay with you right where you are. Okay? It's like that song, where the guy says, girl, you're amazing just the way you are. Well, you know what? Whoever you're talking to, you are amazing just the way you are. Even though you irritate the you-know-what out of me half the time. And I do the same to you. But you're amazing just the way you are. There was something that attracted me to you and you to me. And that's when we didn't spend so much time together, we could really irritate each other so badly. And there wasn't enough love to cover all that. And that's where we struggle. That's where we struggle mightily. He says, now this is where we're going to show that this is all about a maturity or an immaturity in our relationship. He says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned as a child. But when I became a man, I did away with the childish matters. We're still behaving like we're teenagers. Like young teenagers who first discovered interest in somebody in a relationship. You first discovered that you wanted to have relationships. And if you have children and they get to be teenagers and they're doing this relationship thing, you know, if you're in the loop a little bit, just how good they are at it. Now, you might even remember how good you were at it when you were doing it. We're all bad at it, especially at that young age. Nothing but drama and trauma and just a disaster. And it's because as children, we are totally unprepared, unskilled, and unschooled and uneducated in how to do these things. And the hormonal rage of emotion is almost impossible for the mind, and that mindset thing, right? The mind to control the emotions pouring out of the heart. See, I look very Catholic again. I got to watch out for that. Okay? But the mind in a teenager is not strong enough often to overcome the overpowering flow of emotional stuff. And so there's an imbalance. And remember, we said whichever one's stronger drives. Okay? The emotions are stronger than the drive. Well, in a teenager, the emotions are driving all the time. Okay? They are just, chemically imbalanced between the hormones and all the other things changing them. They are just, and not only that, but they're also going into an area that they know nothing about. And so they're very insecure. They have a lot of emotions. They're very bipolar. All teenagers are almost like bipolar because they get so excited more than you would ever do when you get older, and they get so depressed maybe more than you would as you get older because everything is this wide pendulum swing because it's all new. Wow, I'm so excited. I'm in a relationship. Oh, I'm not anymore. This really stinks. And it happens in like a week. And they're not prepared for that. And they don't know what to do with that. Or they're like, oh, I'm in a relationship and I don't have any idea what I'm doing. So now what? I got all these teenagers in the congregation here. You parents probably don't know. They all think they're dating each other. Okay? I know. I'm aware. I get informed. I observe. By the way, you don't have to think about people telling me. I just will pay attention. And they all think they're dating somebody, at least today, and then tomorrow will be somebody else or something will happen. It'll be other drama. But they don't even know what that looks like or what it's supposed to look like or how to do it or that. They don't understand relationships. And by the way, some of you are still thinking like a child, speaking like a child, acting and all that stuff like a child because you're married and you still don't have the slightest idea what you're doing. And it's not your fault, really, because there's no instruction that you could have received, really, to learn how to do this. The only instruction you got was watching other people do it badly. That was your instruction. So you go and get married, and all you know is watching what your parents did and other people, your friends' parents, and how they acted. And you're like, okay, yikes. All right? So you don't know, some of you women, don't worry, I'll get the guys too. Some of you women have mothers that absolutely beat down your fathers and just walked all over them and controlled and dominated the whole deal. And then you get married and think you're supposed to do that to your husbands. Some of you men, you watched your fathers get beat down and act that way and think that you're supposed to take it that way too. Or the other side of it, you had a father that was brutal, abusive, dominating, and dictatorial, and you think that's the right way to go because that's all you saw. And ladies, some of you saw the other side of it where your father was that way and mom just became a doormat and took a beating. And you think somehow that's okay. We have all these awful, wrong examples to learn from. I'm going to hit the guys a little harder because Paul says here, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned. Okay, the reasoning, by the way, you know where the reasoning comes from? Observing the thought and the emotion. That's where the reason comes from. I'm observing and then I'm using reason to decide what to do. Okay? He said, I reasoned as a child. Well, a child is mostly going to let the emotions. I'm feeling something, I either don't want to feel it or I'm going to have that feeling I want to feel more of it. Right? That's all a child cares about. I'm not happy right now, so I'm going to scream until somebody fixes that feeling. But listen, guys, but when I became a man, aren't very many of them actually here. There's guys who, if they were tested and examined, would come up as male. Maybe. I'm not joking. We have a real problem. You want to talk about gender confusion? We actually have real gender confusion. We got men, they know they're men, but they're not men. We got women, they know they're women, but they're not women. Forget about this whole binary this and that. No, I'm just talking about just from what we all grew up with. We have a lot of males that don't know what it means to be a man. A lot of females that don't know what it is to be a woman. And I'm not even talking about a whole, alphabet soup out there that people want to use. I'm just talking about from the basic stuff that you and I understand. And then you bring that into a marriage. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work well at all. It's a complete mess. I've got guys that get mad at me when I talk to them, and I talk fairly strong, and they don't know what to do with it, and I say, because you've not heard from or interacted with a man before. And I have people who say, oh, I don't like the way Rabbi talks. Well, because you've not heard a man before. Because in your mind, that kind of strength doesn't either happen generally, or when it does, it's usually followed by a punch or something, right? You're not used to just hearing controlled strength. Confidence, competence, strength. And so you don't like it. But you need it. And so people leave here because they don't want to deal with that. The men leave here because the men are worse than the women because they don't want to deal with a real man either. Because the real man's going to call them out on them not being one. And I've had a few men in the crying corner, as we call it. And I've had to offer them my left foot or my right foot. Which one do you want? Whichever one's going to straighten you up on your hind legs with your back straight and act like a man. That's why the world is falling apart. I'll blame it on the men, okay? The men are just not doing their thing. They don't understand how to do their thing. All they want to hear is the churches teach them about the women need to submit. Submit to what? They need to submit to a man. Not a brute, not a wet noodle, not wallpaper, not a rage monster, but a man. Okay? See, some of you guys are not happy about your women acting like men. Well, because you're not doing it, they're doing it. Trust me, if you were doing it, they couldn't do it. Because it would get stopped very quickly. Okay? It would. We've had a few Jezebel-like dominant women come in the congregation over the years, and then they come to think that they're going to come and try to do on me what they do with their husbands, and I just look at them and it doesn't work. I don't get mad or anything. It's like, no, we're not doing that, and no, we're just not doing that. And they just leave. Because they didn't get to do what they do at home, which is to have their voice listened to and obeyed. And then they try that with the leadership here. I don't get upset about it. I just look like, okay, we're not doing that. Well, I don't think that's right. I heard you, and we're still not doing it. Okay? And they're not used to that. And ladies, you have to want that. You have to want the man to be a man. But you have to accept that he's not right there yet. And encourage him to be there. Because I'll tell you what, he's never going to get there if you keep wearing his pants. Do you understand? Walking in his shoes. Oh, but things will go wrong. So what? I mean, really, what horrible thing is really going to happen if you let him mess up? Some inconvenience things, maybe. Well, really, is anything horrible going to happen? Are you no longer going to have indoor plumbing and electricity and air conditioning and all the other stuff that you have and cell phones and spoiled things that we are just because he made a few mistakes? Cheer him on, encourage him. You can do this. And guys, you need to get books, videos, and hang out with some men, all right, to learn how to do this. And there are some really good books out there that I would recommend. Okay, for the men's side. I'm trying to find the good ones for the ladies' side, which of course is a little easier if I was a lady as opposed to the guy, because the guys you tend to find and talk about the stuff for your side of the deal. And I'm looking now at a few things that might be good for the ladies. But the thing is, guys, the ladies will have a much easier time getting their side figured out if you are doing your role. They're not, because they're afraid you're going to screw it up, or it's not going to get done, or some other thing. So they are usurping when they do these things, but they think they're helping. And they're doing it to keep things from going bad. That's only because you've not given them the confidence that even if it goes bad, it's okay. That you're going to handle it, fix it, make it right. You need to do that with your children too. My daughter has never I don't know my son as much when I talk to him as much, but my daughter is never, ever concerned that anything I decide is ever going to be a problem, because it's either going to work, and if not, I'm going to fix it. And so she has that ease of security. Well, men, your wives need that too, to have that ease of security, knowing nothing that goes wrong won't be fixed by you. It will be, you'll make it right, you'll handle it, you'll take care of it, and they can feel safe, protected, provided for. And you're looking at me like, but I don't know how to figure it out. See, men figure it out. Men grow up and realize they have to figure it out. That doesn't mean don't get counsel. You have to get counsel. That's how you figure it out. You got to go find the people with the information you need on how to do whatever part of being a man you're not good at, and then you need to figure it out. I don't mean you have to figure it out on your own. Everything that I am, everything you are too, is a result of all the inputs. What have you put in? I read, I listen to books, I watch videos, I've been to seminars, I study what it means to do what I need to do. Some of it's very general. It could be for either the man or the woman, about how to be the best you can be and understand why you're wired so funny and how you struggle with your emotions and your mind. But some of it is understanding the role. All right? Now, love requires us, and we put men and women in here because Paul happens to be talking about himself. But when I became an adult, when I became a man or a woman, right? I became an adult, I did away with the childish way of looking at everything. Childish what? What's childish? The way I spoke? The way I thought? The way I reasoned? You guys still acting like babies. Oh, you don't like that I said that. Well, too bad. It's true. Okay? And some people have said to me, do you have to beat up on us every week? You only feel like I'm beating up on you because of your level of acting like a child. An adult would not feel like I'm beating him up. It's the child in you that's feeling beat up. The adult should be saying, I needed to hear that. I need to knock this off. I am acting like a baby. That's a grown-up way to respond. And it's okay not to like hearing it. Fix it and you won't have to hear it. Because if it's not you, my saying it didn't bother you at all. Because you're like, I got that under control. He must be talking to somebody else. And I might be talking to somebody else. Or I might be talking to you, and now you're just dealing with some arrogance and other problems. But either way, let's understand this. We're going to finish this out. I have to do this quickly here. He says, for now we see in the mirror dimly, but then face to face, now in part, but then I shall know, as I also have been known. And now belief and expectation and love remain, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So let's close out this part of the teaching by understanding that he's trying to communicate in the love chapter here that this is the overriding context, covering, that all the other things are flowing out of, and they're all leading us towards. Because Elohim is love. Amen? Amen. Father, we come before you. And Father, we want to thank you and praise you that you are love. And we want to thank you for teaching us and instructing us through your word what that looks like and how we can become love. So, Father, this is not an easy journey for us because we have not been shown and instructed and have terrible examples. But, Father, we are now learning from you through your teachers, through your word, and that, Father, help us to get past any of our emotional challenges receiving the word, so that we can then take it and embrace it and apply it in our lives. So, Father, we want to thank you and praise you and give you all glory and honor as we digest and approach and embracing this teaching in the name above all names, Yeshua our Messiah. Amen. 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 Right.